The night was heavy with silence, the kind that feels deliberate, as though the world itself was holding its breath. A lone street lamp flickered outside the small apartment on the corner of Ashworth and Ninth, casting long, crooked shadows across the cracked pavement. Inside, a man sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers that had the power to destroy him. His name was Michael Trent, and by the time the sun rose again, he would be branded a murderer. Michael had always lived quietly, a systems analyst who preferred order, numbers, and predictability over the chaos of human deceit. His world was neat, compartmentalized, logical. But that was before his former business partner, Julian Crane, returned. Julian had once been brilliant, charming, magnetic, and ruthless in equal measure. Together, they had built a cybersecurity firm that was meant to change the game. Until greed tore it apart. Michael had walked away, tired of Julian's schemes and shortcuts, tired of watching investors' money vanish into development costs that didn't exist. When the firm collapsed, Julian disappeared overseas, leaving Michael to face the financial fallout. It had taken years for him to rebuild his reputation, years of humble work and quiet redemption. But Julian hadn't forgotten, nor had he forgiven. It began subtly. An email from a client Michael didn't remember. A missed call that traced back to a burner phone. Then the deposit, $500,000 wired to his account from an offshore company he'd never heard of. By the time he noticed, it was too late. Within days, detectives were knocking at his door, their questions sharp and efficient. The crime was brutal. A corporate whistleblower had been found dead, strangled in a downtown hotel room. The police had digital records, security footage, fingerprints. Every thread led back to Michael. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He explained, calmly at first, then desperately, that someone had used his credentials, hacked his system. But the evidence piled too high, too neatly, to be coincidence. Emails arranging meetings. Surveillance showing him entering the hotel lobby. DNA on a discarded glass. His protests fell on deaf ears. In the eyes of the law, the facts were simple, and facts were all that mattered. What no one knew, what no one could prove, was that Julian had been planning this for years. Revenge was his art, and Michael, the man who had once trusted him, was his masterpiece. When Julian vanished after their firm's collapse, he hadn't run from failure. He had been preparing for vengeance. With money hidden under a web of fake companies, with identities stitched from digital ghosts, Julian became a shadow that could move through systems unseen. He learned Michael's habits, his passwords, his digital footprint. He built a digital double so convincing that even Michael's closest friends would have sworn it was him. The trap was perfect. The whistleblower Julian killed had once worked for their firm, the one man who could prove Julian's embezzlement. His death wasn't just revenge. It was self-preservation. By framing Michael, Julian silenced both threats at once. Michael's trial was swift. The prosecution painted him as a man driven by greed and bitterness, a failed businessman lashing out at the man who had ruined him. The jury took less than 4 hours to decide his fate. Life in prison without parole. The verdict echoed through the courtroom, and Michael's world collapsed into a single point of disbelief. The first year in prison nearly broke him. The walls felt alive, closing in, whispering accusations in the dark. He replayed every memory, every choice, every moment with Julian, trying to understand where it had all gone wrong. But understanding didn't help. It only deepened the wound. Then one night as he sat in the prison library, something strange happened. A guard handed him a letter, unmarked and signed, no return address. Inside was a single photo. It showed Julian, older now, standing beside a luxury car in Monaco, smiling. On the back, in neat handwriting, were the words, "Still believe in justice?" Michael didn't sleep that night. For the first time in months, his despair hardened into something else, resolve. He began studying law in the prison library, poring over case files, precedents, appeals. He filed motions, wrote letters to journalists, begged for forensic re-examination. Most were ignored. But persistence is its own kind of weapon, and Michael had nothing left to lose. After nearly a decade, A journalist named Claire Reynolds took interest in his story. She was skeptical, but the precision of the setup gnawed at her. No one leaves that clean a trail unless they want to be found. Claire began to dig into Julian's old contacts, into the companies behind the mysterious wire transfer, into the inconsistencies in the surveillance footage. Bit by bit, she began to uncover the fingerprints of a ghost. The footage that had convicted Michael had one imperfection, a reflection in a mirror that didn't match his height. The timestamp on an email had been altered by milliseconds, just enough to go unnoticed by anyone who wasn't looking. The offshore company that funded the transfer was linked to a shell corporation that had once belonged to Julian's mother. The threads began to connect. When the truth finally came out, it was anticlimactic in its precision. Julian was caught not by a confession, but by a routine audit on one of his shell accounts, a small irregularity that led investigators back through a chain of transactions spanning a decade. When the police raided his villa, they found the original laptop that had been used to forge Michael's digital trail. His plan had been perfect, but perfection has a way of betraying itself. Michael walked out of prison after 12 years, a free man on paper, but hollow inside. The world had moved on without him. His mother had died believing he was guilty. Friends had turned away. The system that had failed him offered an apology and a settlement, as though freedom could be measured in dollars. Julian, meanwhile, died before trial, found hanging in his cell, an apparent suicide. But Michael never believed it. Not because he thought Julian was innocent, but because death was too easy. Too neat. Julian had spent his life controlling the game, and Michael suspected that even his death had been another move on the board. In the years that followed, Michael lived quietly again, but something in him had changed. He no longer believed in the clean logic of justice, in systems or fairness. He believed only in truth, and the fact that truth, once twisted, can destroy more than any weapon. Sometimes, when the night was quiet and the street lamps flickered outside his window, he would think about that letter, still believe in justice, and realize that Julian had won after all. Because even free, Michael was still serving his sentence. Years slipped by, as quietly as dust settling on forgotten photographs. Michael Trent lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city, a man who had learned to move through the world as if afraid of disturbing it. He worked nights at a local repair shop, the kind of place where broken things went to disappear, and spent his days walking aimlessly, avoiding crowds, avoiding questions. Freedom had not restored him, it had only changed the shape of his cage. The newspapers had moved on long ago. His name was no longer whispered in courtrooms or flashed across headlines. The world had forgotten Michael Trent, the killer who fooled the system. The exoneration barely made a paragraph on page 6, and even then, most readers shrugged. Innocence, once lost, is never fully recovered. But the past has a way of breathing even after death. One evening, as Michael was closing the shop, a car pulled up, sleek, black, too expensive for the neighborhood. A woman stepped out, dressed in a dark coat, her movements purposeful. Her face was familiar, though he couldn't place it at first. Then memory stirred. The courtroom, the witness stand, the voice that had once trembled as she testified against him. Her name was Julian Crane, Julian's sister. "I need to talk to you," she said, her tone clipped but not hostile. Michael stared for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or walk away. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Haven't I paid enough for your brother's sins?" Evelyn looked at him, eyes dark with something unreadable. "You don't understand," she said. "Julian's death, it wasn't suicide." Michael froze. He had always suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud was like reopening an old wound. Evelyn went on, her words coming faster, trembling slightly. "Julian kept records, detailed ones. Names, accounts, operations. He was involved in things even I didn't know about. Before he died, he sent me a file, encrypted. I didn't know what to do with it until now. I think someone killed him to keep that information buried." Michael leaned against the workbench, feeling the weight of a decade press against him again. "Why tell me?" he asked. "Because you're the only one who has a reason to want the truth," she said. And because if they find out I still have what he sent, I won't last long. She handed him a small drive, unmarked, simple, almost innocuous. But in Michael's hands, it felt like a loaded weapon. That night, long after Evelyn had gone, he sat at his desk staring at the drive. Every instinct pulled him to throw it away, to walk away from everything that bore Julian's shadow. But curiosity, or maybe vengeance, whispered louder. He plugged it in. The screen flickered, and a folder appeared, titled Aegis. Inside were hundreds of files, financial records, emails, encrypted communications, photographs. But one file stood out. Trent_project. He opened it, and the air seemed to thin around him. It was all there, every detail of how Julian had framed him. The planning, the fabrication of evidence, the names of people he had paid to lie, the judge he had bribed to fast-track the trial. But there was more. There were communications between Julian and men whose names Michael didn't recognize, government contractors, private intelligence operatives. It wasn't just personal revenge. Michael had been used as a pawn in something larger, something that reached far beyond one man's vendetta. Over the next few days, Michael followed the threads, tracing them through encrypted servers and dummy corporations. Each revelation pulled him deeper into a labyrinth of corruption. Julian hadn't just been a criminal genius, he'd been working for people who specialized in manufacturing guilt. Framing the innocent wasn't revenge for them. It was business. Michael realized then that his case hadn't been unique. There were others, dozens of them, all swept away by fabricated evidence, all erased quietly by systems that were supposed to protect them. And behind it all, a single organization whose purpose was to control, discredit, and eliminate threats to powerful clients. He began sending what he found to Claire Reynolds, the journalist who had once saved him. She was cautious, skeptical, but the more she saw, the more she understood that this wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was a hidden economy built on deception. Then Evelyn disappeared. One night, she simply stopped answering calls. Her apartment was empty, the locks broken, the floor covered with shards of glass. The police called it a robbery. Michael knew better. They were watching him again, he could feel it. Cars idling too long near his house, emails that vanished after being read, the faint click of a line being tapped. It was Julian's world all over again, except this time the puppet master was gone, and the strings were being pulled by faceless hands. Michael had a choice: disappear or fight. And after years of silence, of being defined by a crime he didn't commit, he chose the latter. He began leaking the files, one by one, through anonymous channels, feeding them to journalists, activists, and digital watchdogs across the globe. The first release caused ripples. The second caused panic. Within months, several high-ranking officials and businessmen were exposed. Investigations were launched. Some denied involvement, others fled. The network began to crumble. But Michael knew there would be consequences. Truth was never given freely. It demanded payment. One rainy night, as he walked home, he noticed the same black car from before parked near his street. The headlights dimmed as he approached. He kept walking, his heartbeat steady. The car door opened, and a figure stepped out. Not Julian, not Evelyn, but someone who looked at him with the same cold amusement Julian once had. "You should have stayed quiet," the man said. Michael didn't answer. He had already expected this. In his pocket was a small drive, a dead man's switch. If he didn't log in by morning, every remaining file would go public. The man raised a gun. The streetlight flickered once, then went dark. When the police arrived hours later, they found nothing but Michael's coat lying on the wet pavement, the rain washing away what little evidence remained. Weeks later, the final batch of files was released online. Every hidden name, every crime, every secret transaction, exposed to the world. No one ever found Michael Trent. Some said he fled the country. Others whispered he was killed. But those who knew his story, the real story, believed something different. They believed that after years of being hunted, framed, and silenced, Michael had finally become what Julian once was, a ghost who lived in the shadows, not for revenge, but to make sure the world never forgot what had been done to him. And sometimes, When the city sleeps and a lone street lamp flickers on the corner of Ashworth and Ninth, those who pass by swear they see a man standing there, silent, watching, as if waiting for justice that never truly came.